Just about everywhere any of you live, the pandemic is out of control, or at least surging again to levels that are meaning more lockdowns, going back to past restrictions like no in-dining in restaurants or schools shutting back down. The virus itself is only partially directly responsible for the death and sickness of so many people. And of course, the implosion of the economy that has actually led to more sickness and death and shorter lifespans now and in the future. Millions of people who lost their jobs and savings are going to be sicker because they lost employer health care or they were too afraid to get regular care, and in a bigger sense, being driven into bankruptcy, losing your savings, your home, and looking at years of economic struggles will mean for many shorter lives. This crisis isn't principally about the virus. It's about blind ideology. Now, put aside for a moment two very important pieces of that ideology, and that is the ideology of a president and his enablers. Perhaps ideology is too kind a word to use for Trump because it implies some thought-out belief system beyond pure narcissism. But those folks basically lied about and denied that the pandemic was upon us. And then second, the stupidity of the same folks who encouraged millions of people to not wear masks, the simplest and most effective thing we could do to stop the pandemic until a vaccine arrives. Now, I put those two things aside to focus on one central idea. Ideology is in the way of a simple plan to end the pandemic in 30 days. Yes, 30 days. Lock down the country and pay everyone to stay at home. I made this argument many months ago, and I'm just resurrecting this again because the debate about a stimulus is on the agenda again. And again, I say because for months, Republicans have basically said, fuck you to the entire country when it comes to aiding the people. Back in the spring, Representative Pramila Jayapal in the House and Bernie Sanders and several other senators in the Senate proposed something simple. Pay people up to $90,000 a year until the unemployment rate declines below 7% for 3 straight months. This is economic and medical logic. Pay people enough money so they can pay bills like rent and food, and that allows them to stay home, either because they are sick or simply to allow them to lock down and not go to work for a number of weeks until the so-called curve is dramatically going down and flat. Jayapal's bill was not included in the $3 trillion package passed in May by the House because the House leadership, Nancy Pelosi and her crew, did not support it. They embraced a completely insufficient, pathetic monthly payment that would not cover people's real expenses. And I think the failure to do so, to be very bold about this, hurt the Democrats in the past election. If people don't have money in their pockets, they won't stay home and they won't stop going to work because unlike the billionaires like Jeff Bezos, who made plenty of money during the pandemic, people need that weekly pay to spend on basics like food. Workers need direct wage support, and they should not have to wait months to get even some of that money through a weak unemployment system, which has been imploding from the wave of applications, as you probably know. Now, part of Jayapal's proposal also had billions of dollars in it for states and local governments to keep people on their payrolls. And it also covered the health care costs for all of those people who lost their employer-based health care coverage. Yes, that's another argument for Medicare for all, of course. Now, this isn't just a moral argument. It's a simple economic argument. Whether we like it or not, 2/3 of the economy is powered by consumer spending. And yes, that has a lot of downsides, which I've talked about before, but let's just deal with the reality today. And you can really go big now, spend lots of money because interest rates are at record low levels. So any borrowing is going to be done on the cheap and will easily pay off down the road in security for millions of people. A full year of wage support might cost around $1.3 trillion. Let's just say, make it an even $2 trillion. Compare that to months and months of wages lost, industries crippled, suppressed economic activity, or the long-term effects of millions of kids falling behind in school because they are trapped at home trying to learn online. I would even think it's worth considering adding another $1 trillion to make small businesses whole up to, say, $500,000 for the 30 days. By small business, I mean any business having to shut down, whose annual net revenues are up to, say, $6 million and employ fewer than 500 people, which means forget about it, Amazon or Walmart. This money's not for you. Jeff Bezos and the Waltons can pay for what they might lose over 30 days out of the change that they put on their nightstands that's in their pockets. So you basically are covering small businesses for lost revenues for 30 days. The point is to get people to buy into a nationwide lockdown to suppress the pandemic. It's a bargain, and it will save lives. And I would propose this now because Georgia. Obviously, this idea of paying people to stay home up to $90,000 a year is dead on arrival in the Senate, where multimillionaire Mitch McConnell and his mostly equally rich caucus only care about confirming right-wing judges and continuing to enable Trump's unhinged post-election behavior. It's certainly not on their agenda to help millions of people who are close to destitution. But what if folks took this up and campaigned loudly across the country, and especially in Georgia, where the statewide 14-day average of new cases has risen more than 40%? It's a winning issue and a motivation to vote. Get rid of McConnell and get paid to stay home and be safe. Now, I mentioned kids and schools a moment ago. High up on the list of complete and utter chaos and cluelessness has been the way in which political leaders at the local and state level have mishandled how to safely reopen schools so teachers and kids don't get sick. My view is it can't be done when the pandemic is raging, and the only way to do it, even when the pandemic starts to decline, is with a huge investment in schools, like increasing smaller classroom settings, which we should do anyway, frankly. I wanted to get a sense of the current state of play, so why not look at what's happening in Arizona, where voters just approved a new tax hike to fund education, and at the same time, the infections are on a steep rise. The Arizona Education Association has just posted a public petition to the governor to enact life-saving measures to make sure that schools can try to reopen safely. And you can find the petition at the AEA's website. That's ArizonaAE.org. So to talk about the status, it's great to welcome in Joe Thomas, the president of the Arizona Education Association. So on this podcast, Joe, we've been covering the pandemic since actually it started, focusing, in fact, what's happening to frontline workers. And we've talked to poultry workers, retail workers, bus drivers, to transit workers. And we've done a lot as it relates to teachers. And I wonder, first of all, taking a step back and looking at the macro picture, it seems to me that what's happening to frontline workers, and I use that broadly defined, teachers, healthcare workers, anybody who is dealing with the public, however you define it, it seems to me there's a combination of three things going on that's threatening frontline workers. There's greed, which is perhaps more in the private sector. Certainly, this is why tens of thousands of poultry and meat processing workers have gotten sick. There's ideology, and then there's incompetence. And I wonder, of those three elements, what are you seeing in your state, in your experience in the past few months? What elements have combined to really put your teachers, your members, at risk?
Well, I would say it's incompetence. It's a refusal of our governor to lead. And I think there's also, across the three of those ideas that you put out, there's a devaluing of the people that are doing the work, and there's an expectation that the work is still going to be done. We want to be on our campuses. We want to be in our classrooms, but the campuses and the classrooms have to be safe for our students and have to be safe for the adults that work there. And if we can't get that investment, which is half of the problem, to where we can find those creative ideas of spacing our students out, of maybe adjusting the schedule a little bit, but still meeting the needs for them to have a quality public education. If we can't have those if we can't have that support, then we'll never meet the expectations of the public. The second issue that we're really seeing is people are wanting us to be in school, and they're wanting us to be at an increased risk, but they're not willing to adopt the behaviors back home and in their own backyards that will suppress the spread of this virus. And so we're still having slumber parties, we're still having all kinds of sports and practices, and without any kind of thought of how do we reduce the risk to suppress the spread. And it makes you feel like, again, you're devalued, but your work is still needed. And it's causing a lot of educators to think this is not the profession for me right now. And we're really facing, I would say, an increased number of people that probably will not come back for the next semester.
So there's actually an exodus from the profession that you're seeing.
I do believe that we are going to see an increased number. We have more people that speak to us in surveys that talk about the considerations they're having around that, whether that's just for the rest of this year or if that's for a couple of years to take time off. But they have family members that they would be putting at risk, or they themselves have health conditions that put them at risk if they're in some of these classrooms, or if they're the ones driving the bus, or if they're the ones cleaning our campuses.
And it seems so obvious to me that there's such easy things to do when it comes to school. And in some way, from my perspective, some of this is about the lack of investment in schools going back many years. For example, class size. The obvious solution, for example, in terms of safety for teachers would be to have smaller class size where students and teachers could actually practice some social distancing. But then you layer on that the need for masks and some of the other investments. And that's why I often think, especially when it comes to education and teachers, that this really is about ideology. I mean, you do have a Republican governor, and frankly, however, there are plenty of Democratic governors in other states who are not necessarily doing much better. But let's focus on your state. It seems to me that this is wrapped up in the ideology of a governor who doesn't see the value of the teachers, and perhaps is frankly anti-union too.
Well, he certainly is. And so much so, there's such consistency that we can trust that the Governor Ducey, will not support us. He has had every opportunity to institute the basic pieces of a plan. And we've reached out to him multiple times to try to get him to take a leadership role and institute a statewide mask mandate for our schools. To be, if you're going to be on campus, if you're going to be in the buses, we have to take this basic safety measure. He won't even do that through the end of the year. We've not seen any kind of funding from the state to make sure that our air conditioners and ventilation systems are up to code, that they're working as efficiently and effectively as they can, and that we can bring in the more high-end, more expensive filters to use in those systems, to where we can at least be saying, well, we're circulating the air the way the CDC says we should. Oftentimes what you see educators buying their own PPE. You see educators that are bringing in, just like they do for their students, they're spending their own money purchasing the safety equipment that the state should be providing for us. This undermines confidence and morale in educators that their community stands with them, and it becomes very, very frustrating.
And that led me to the second point that I wanted to bring up. One of the great things that I remember back when you were doing the Red for Ed campaign, when you and I spoke, it's been now over 2 years. One of the great things that you did was you created a community coalition around the notion of education funding. And that happened, by the way, with the Red for Ed campaign in other states, mainly so-called red states, so-called more conservative states, although this election kind of scrambled all that definition up a little bit, right? I wonder if you're concerned that what the governor's doing, intentionally or unintentionally, is driving a little bit of a wedge between that great community support that you had between teachers and parents and other people in the community. Because yes, I get, and I have many friends who are tearing their hair out, that their kids are at home, and you probably understand this too. They want their kids to be in school, partly for their sanity, but also to make sure they get good education. So I wonder if you're concerned that that tension is being created by the governor, either intentionally or unintentionally.
Well, we're absolutely concerned about it. And when educators and parents stand together, we can do anything inside our schools. We can end up with the public schools that our students deserve. And we saw that, quite frankly, in the Red for Ed movement. I think what has been missing a little bit is listening. Educators can understand a little bit of what parents are going through because many of us are parents. I have a sophomore in high school and I have two kids in college right now. College is entirely online. My son's school took a step back into a hybrid modality where he goes 2 days a week to his classes with about half of the students on campus, and he's virtual the rest of the time. Before that, for a few weeks straight, they were fully back in. So it does become disruptive, but we don't understand every personal story. And so educators have to listen to our parents. We have to understand, how do we construct a school experience during crisis teaching that meets the needs of our students the best ways that we can. And the two concerns that we see pop up in surveys out to parents, overwhelmingly, they want their children to be safe and they don't want their children to fall behind academically. The story we have to tell parents and that we want them to listen to is, we can provide a great education, but we have to be supported in the creative ways that we need to do it. And so it might not mean completely online, but it might mean a situation like my son is in, where you may not be having your student go 5 days a week, or maybe they're going for shorter day periods, or maybe we have the high school students that are at home more days a week and our elementary students that are in school, but we have to be able to do it safely. We have to open up more classrooms. And quite frankly, we have to have educators that can safely report. Right now, when we have a quarantine, that doesn't just impact our students, but it also impacts our educators as well. And I'm sorry about the dogs barking in the background. It's, we're all
It's part of the Zoom world. It's okay. It's
right.
part of our quarantine world. It's no problem.
When we do have quarantines of students, oftentimes our educators are caught up in that as well. We have a tremendous shortage of substitute teachers right now, because if I'm an administrator calling out to you and I say, hey, I've just had a quarantine at my school, I've lost 2 teachers, I need you to come in and teach one of their courses. If you're a substitute teacher, you have to decide, is that a risk I will take? And so we have a lot of educators that are getting sick, that are being quarantined. It's creating another disruption to the continuity of the child's education. And so there are some districts that have just pulled back. Some districts in Arizona that completely pulled back and said, we're going to do the whole semester online. And these are mainly high school districts, but we certainly have some elementary districts as well. And they may see, before all this is done, the least disruptions of anybody. Because when you get caught in this kind of back and forth, where for a month we're going to be fully in, and then a couple of weeks we're going to be in hybrid, and then we spiked again in our spread rate, and so now we're going to be fully online. Every one of those transitions is difficult on students, especially the younger that they are. So the most important thing is the simplest thing, and it's what we all have to be doing at home. If we really want to keep our schools open, we have to take the precautions at home to mask up, to wash our hands, and to socially distance. And Arizona did it really well in the summer, when the first time we hit a spike. And it looks like we're going to have to really double down and do it again.
Well, in fact, we're in the midst in Arizona, and certainly in many other states, but certainly in Arizona, an incredible spike and surge in infections and widespread community surge. And I'm wondering where the problem is partly the chaos that I mentioned. I happened to read a little bit in the Arizona newspapers that it seems like there's not a statewide plan, that a lot of the districts are doing one thing and then there's districts doing another thing. So some of that confusion, frankly, is laid at the feet of the administrators, who probably want a statewide plan that would come from the governor and have some coherence so everybody could be on the same page, right?
Absolutely. And what it causes when the governors will refuse to lead, when a governor like Governor Ducey remains silent on the issue and points to guidelines, which guidelines are good. They give you at least something. But what we really need are hard, fast mandates right now, especially when we're spiking, to make sure that everyone understands how serious the situation is. If the leader of your state is saying, well, just follow these guidelines, it would be like all of the speed limits on the highway just being kind of suggestions. It becomes dangerous very, very quickly. And it creates more turmoil at the district level, because again, once this has become politicized like it has become at the federal level and in our state, quite frankly, as well, You have parents that firmly believe that this is a hoax,
Mm.
that this is no worse than the common cold, that everybody's going to get it. And the faster everybody gets it, the faster we get through it with herd immunity. And you have parents that will say, my children are not going to go to school. I'm going to pull them out and put them in the online. And then their fight is kind of over in some cases because they're protecting their children, which of course is are the first thing we all think about. What's left are the people that move back and forth when because as the cases increase and we see more of a spike, they become much more concerned, and then they're willing to pull back and take it seriously. They're still fighting the ones that are kind of the anti-vaccination crowd that just feel like, get it, get over it. Your children aren't going to be that impacted by it. When science doesn't agree with that at all. All of that is happening at the local level. It is absolutely unnecessary, and it's causing rifts that are going to take years to heal because the governor won't come out and say, here are the 5 things we're all going to do. And when the rate gets back down to here, we're going to back off these 2. And when the rate gets a little bit further down, we're going to back off these other 3. That shows that it's serious. We're all in it together, and he's leading on it. But for whatever reason, he refuses to do it. And it's hurting educators.
Now, you mentioned earlier in our conversation about the, if you will, the brain drain, teachers deciding that, hey, maybe I don't want to be in this profession because I'm putting myself at risk. I have a really good friend who's a teacher who is teaching online, and that's a whole nother challenge for teachers. And it's extremely frustrating, obviously for students, but for teachers as well, trying to manage all these rooms on Zoom or whatever program they're using. I'm guessing they're putting aside the health effects, which are real serious, of not wanting to be in the physical space of school. There must be an incredible pressure on teachers and frustration of trying to communicate and do real good teaching over online.
It has really become an unbelievable pressure on educators, both last spring and this year. And we really have 3 modes of teaching students right now. If you're in the classroom with your students, and some of our schools are there, and they say that that's the way they're going to finish the entire year, you're thinking about the air you breathe, the books and the counters that you touch, and the time that you have to clean those counters and desktops between a class exchange. You're thinking about things like that you've never had to think of before. You're having to monitor where your students are, if they're quarantined, if other people on campus are exposed. You're having to crisis teach in person. It's very different than what we kind of signed on to do. People are finding creative ways to get through it. The second way is fully online. Not all educators were trained how to be an online teacher. It is a whole different way of teaching. They've learned as fast as they could to be as effective as they can be. You still have students that don't log on during the day. They don't get their lessons, whether it's part of the interaction like we're doing right now, where it's live, or it's part of the sign on and read this passage or do these math problems and fill out and then submit your work. It becomes very, very difficult in that asynchronous learning environment. The worst mode is when we combine the 2 of those. And we have several districts in the state of Arizona that are doing this. And this is the number 1 reason right now that we see educators losing the profession, is when I have a roster of 35 high schoolers, which is not uncommon in Arizona, and 17 of them are showing up in class every day, and 18 of them are online. And in the exact same moments of the day, I am teaching the students in my classroom, and I'm standing in front of a camera trying to engage the half that's online. You teach differently in those different modalities, and yet our educators are expected to prepare 2 lesson plans and deliver them simultaneously. They are at their wits' end around this modality. And what's driving it, and it is understandable, what's driving it is when parents made the decision around whether their students would come back or they would stay home, they also wanted to keep those school rosters, those class rosters, whole. And so instead of you and I saying, well, one of us will be the online teacher and we'll take both of our students that are going to be online, and the other one of us will be the in-person teacher and we'll take both of all of our students that are going to be in person, parents and some administrators said that would be too disruptive. Let's keep the kids together. I understand that, but it is absolutely crushing our educators that are caught in that, because they don't feel they're being effective with either group.
So to wrap up our conversation, yesterday you posted online a petition, a that is really a plea, a public plea that is oriented and going to go to the governor. Tell us a little bit about what that's about and how my audience and other people can engage that.
Well, back in August and then again in October, we submitted letters to the governor with our ideas of the basic components that needed to be in a plan, a statewide plan, to support our educators and support what we called safe schools. We've not heard anything from the governor on either of those approaches. We've sent another letter to the governor earlier this week, and then we posted the pledge because we want the governor to understand the ideas that we're putting forth. These are not radical ideas. Wear a mask while you're in school. Let's look at these metrics that we have and let's make hard decisions around them. Let's not leave it up to the governing board. If you have more than 100 cases of COVID per 100,000 inhabitants in your school boundaries, then you need to move to hybrid. And if you have it for 3 weeks, you need to move to online. We have to safeguard our school employees. We have to safeguard our students. We're calling for the air conditioning systems to be checked. And put a priority around that to supply the districts with funding so they can purchase those filters so at least the air can move around more quickly. And we're asking anyone that reads this and they agree with the pieces of this plan to sign on to it, to let the governor know that there is support for safe schools, and it is his responsibility to enact a plan that keeps not only our students safe, not only their families safe, but our educators and their families as well. We are going to come out on the other side of this virus. We all know that's going to happen. What's going to make it happen more quickly is if we do the things we need to do at home and we support our educators and we support all of our frontline workers with the resources they need to be able to have schools that are safe. That's how we move forward. And we are definitely asking any of your listeners and anyone out there that's seeing our posts on social media, go to the address that you'll see on social media and sign on to that pledge. Let's let the governor know that we do value safe schools.
Well, I'm definitely going to urge my audience to do that. And thank you for your work, and thank you for the work of the union. And we'll have you back on the show to update us how this is going and how you're working to protect your members. Thanks for being on the show, Joe.
Thank you, Jonathan, for having me. It's been a pleasure.